Welcome to Forging Plowshares, a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom of God. We hope this part of our ongoing conversation stimulates your mind and challenges your heart about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Please stay tuned at the end of the podcast for a short message about our ministry.
Here is the beginning of Class 3 with Jordan Daniel Wood, in which Jordan continues then to describe the process of deification, or how it is that the processes of being human ending in deification in fact surpass the process itself, so that the beginning is in the end. If you are enjoying these podcasts, we hope that you will follow us on social media, that you will subscribe to Forging Plowshares and to our blog, Walking Truth, that you'll consider taking a class. And our next class then is with Michael Harden. This class will run through the week of October 7th to the first week of December. Registration is not open yet for the class. I'm taking a trip to Japan and I'll be gone until the 19th, but we'll open registration on September 20th. So to apply to the class, you need to go to Plowshares Bible Institute and fill out an application. And then upon acceptance of the application, on September 20th or thereafter, you can register for the class with Michael Harden. And Michael then is providing resource material directly from Rene Girard, some of which has not been published. And so Michael knew Rene Girard. He's sharing with us then access to information that I don't think is otherwise available. We look forward to that class in October, November, and the beginning of December. But hope you enjoy this part 3 then, Class 3 with Jordan Daniel Wood. Morning, David.
Good morning.
How's everything?
Pretty good. Pretty good today.
Matt, are you hearing us?
I'm hearing you loud and clear. Crystal.
All right. All right. Are you all over your diseases?
No, I'm still fraught with allergies.
For some reason, I feel like living in paradise, there should be certain punishments that come with it.
Apparently, this is it. It was just the allergy. The pollen. The pollen is the punishment. Well, and I was thinking, but you have a lot of nerve, complaining about the homework after your classes that you would assign hundreds and hundreds of pages a week.
Yeah. He's actually taken into account the mortality of the students. I don't know that I ever did that. So when Ryan Himmer came into my class, and I realized Ryan could do about anything that I asked him to do. I never lowered my standard.
Yeah, that's a pretty unreasonable standard.
Paul, I think you got us prepared for small bites of Maximus to pack such a punch. All the heavy reading, all those months ahead of this is paying off.
Oh, good. Yeah, we did a bit with Maximus, didn't we?
Well, I'm thinking of our interpretation class, because we did a bit with Maximus, but all the reading before, about origin.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Found that to be real helpful, reading Ambiguous 7.
Joanna, everything going well in New Mexico?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's all good here. It's finally getting a little warmer. Springtime's coming, so that's nice.
Is Santa Fe a little more elevated than other places?
Oh, yeah, it's a pretty high elevation. Yeah, it's 7,000 feet above sea level.
Okay. I moved to Roswell from the panhandle of Texas. I didn't think you could get any more desolate than the panhandle of Texas. But Roswell managed to do that. In New Mexico, this landscape, you'd be riding and there'd be little caves and everywhere. The heat was quite overwhelming.
Yeah, I really like the landscape here. We've got, have you ever been to the Valles Caldera? Yeah, it's this really cool like flat plain that like was created from some like collapsed volcanoes, and it's you can go there and you'll find like all this obsidian on the ground. It's a really cool place geologically.
It is the land of enchantment, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, land of enchantment.
Hello.
There you are. I was trying to find you among the crowd here. I knew you were here.
I am here. Thank you all for being here. How you doing, Paul?
I'm good. Good. Everything running smooth in spite of the sun disappearing in the middle of the week.
That's just called every week here in Washington at this time of year.
We drove down to southern Illinois we wanted to get totality. And I was just amazed at the thousands of people in rural Illinois. And they were parking everywhere. They were parking in McDonald's and Walmart on the freeway. And then 64 completely stopped.
Who says we're disenchanted? The American people want totality.
That's right. That's right.
And they want it from the sun god. Yeah, no, it was same story here, Paul. It was like we were trying to hit totality. It really was only supposed to be, 2 hours south of where I live, but we couldn't even get within an hour, and we left hours before. And
we had a total eclipse in Washington when I was a kid. It must have been like 1980 or so. I was because I can remember I was on the way walking to school, and it went from being basically like dusk in the winter in Washington State. There's hardly any sun, so it's already dust-like conditions to actually like night conditions.
We ended up having to stop at a place that was only like, I think we probably got 80 or 98% totality, which is still really cool, but it is still very different because you have to use the glasses and stuff still. So, but I always find it's what it does to the light, the contrast on everything on the ground. That's so weird to me. And that in conjunction with like the chilly wind, and it felt like I was in Lars von Trier's Melancholia or something. It was like what is going on here? Everything takes on such a, I don't know how to describe it, really distinct hue. All right, well, shall we start?
Let's start. They've all read all of the assignments and they're well honed for all that you have to say.
Okay, good for you. That is quite the mammoth task that you took on. Our two texts for this week. I mean, I think the second one, in a way, is the from the intro to questions to Thalassius is a little more, I don't know, it's a little more, it's just less difficult than Ambiguum 7. It's a bit more straightforward because it's about evil and the origin of evil, although as we'll see, it certainly turns up a lot of deep questions, I think. But I think pairing these two texts together is really what, like, at least for me, I mean, obviously I'm teaching this course, I'm presenting my kind of view of Maximus as I go, just because it's me talking. And so some of this is like almost autobiographically or like phenomenologically in studying Maximus, how things stuck out to me about his vision. And sometimes like what I can do, and I think this week is a case of that, I can just basically give you like two texts that I was like, when I read these side by side, that really generated some really profound questions, and I think opened up some deeper, hopefully, insights into Maximus's approach to several different things. And so, as always with Maximus, so here we're in the third week of the course. This is though the second week of the vision that, remember the course sort of broken up into, as it were, two roughly almost equal parts. First, vision, his theological panorama. And then the second is going to be a little bit more focused on action or practices or, sort of spiritual life stuff. So, and of course, these are mutually eliminating and mutually entailing, and synthesis, right, is the word. So, but this is the second week. Next week will be the last week of the vision portion directly. Last week, we talked about creation in Christ, the grand vision. I basically think it was the big picture in question 60, with the incarnation, the event of the incarnation being the origin or the arche, principle, and telos, goal or end of all creation, right? And so we talked about that. We talked about some mind-bending implications of that and so forth. And what we're doing this week, I think, one way to we get some of that as well, of course, right? Ambiguum 7 is if it's anything, it's high flying and it's panoramic and it's everything else. But I think reading this text with the portion of the intro and some of the themes we're going to focus on, we're going to move from a little bit the big picture to seeing, I think, the paradoxes, or even what I call, I think, in this week, the dilemma of the process, picture to process. Because it's one thing to talk about the theory, right? The abstract sort of, here's what's going on, here's formally our end and our beginning, and even to posit something like something as peculiar as this event in the midst of space-time, in the midst of history, the incarnation somehow is also universal. Okay, that's still a kind of formal panoramic big picture judgment, even though it's super interesting and it starts to draw us in. But then the question becomes, what does this actually mean for the unfolding, right? The real process of creation isn't just an instant or a snapshot. It's certainly not just a schema or a taxonomy of things. And that's sometimes how we can read this material. It's a dynamic process. But the process itself, and this is kind of the big claim I'll return to maybe here and there, the process itself is marked by paradoxes exactly because its creation is incarnation. So the same sort of paradoxes, seeming coincidence of opposites, seeming impossibilities here and with respect to this, but then also we're going to affirm something like its opposite here. These things are going to mark the very contemplation of the process itself and ultimately our actual experience of life itself. And so that's kind of that's the movement, that's the overture in terms of what the themes we're going to be thinking about and looking at and seeing in these texts. Roughly speaking, now I'm going to turn to the two texts. Ambiguum 7, I think, we'll get into some of the details because they're very fascinating. But the big picture that is going to emerge out of 7 is that process is necessary. Right? Movement is necessary. Motion is necessary. And that it's good, and that it has this clear terminus, and the terminus is nothing less than God himself, and this is going to be characterized by love, right? All that stuff that you read, and we'll look at a few of the passages in particular. And of course, that's a part and parcel of his resistance or refutation of a certain other story, right? That whole thing is kind of framed polemically. We'll get into that. But the big idea that's going to emerge out of 7 is that process is necessary and in itself good. However, when we turn to the second text, we're also going to see something like process seems inevitably doomed to fail, or at least to err, right? To wander off. And so this creates what I mean by the dilemma. The dilemma is, on the one hand, the process is necessary in order to achieve the goal or the project of creation. On the other hand, it seems like the very things that are denied in 7 about, say, the necessity of evil and all that other stuff almost do seem somewhat inevitable when you get to, say, his interpretation of tree of the knowledge of good and evil and mixed knowledge. And right. So this is going to be that kind of seeming tension is what we're going to play with a little bit. I think it starts to open up some interesting dimensions. And ultimately, it's going to lead just to the last little part of the big picture here. It's going to lead to next week in the discussion of Christ's passion as judgment, and how it is that the actual life and death of Christ and resurrection is something like a response to, or even quote unquote resolution of the dilemma we're going to discuss today. That's kind of where we're at in the woods. We're located in the forest, and so we're going to wander down the path here a little bit more. Let's turn to Ambiguum 7 then. Again, some of this stuff, is stuff we've already even managed to address earlier in the week. So I want to quickly sum it up. But Ambiguum 7 isn't just, we've talked about how the ambigua and also the responses to questions to Thalassius, these are sort of responses. Maximus is giving responses to inquiries, usually about difficult or ambiguous passages, and ambigua to John, which is what we're reading Ambiguum 7 from. That's responding to a difficulty in the church fathers, usually Gregory of Nazianzus' orations. Here, though, it is like a difficult passage that he's addressing, but it's specifically I'm sure you noticed right away. It's specifically a kind of refutation or a resistance to a certain sort of interpretation of this passage. So it's not just, hey, this is a weird passage or kind of dense or opaque passage in Gregory. What does he mean by it? That's kind of what we got last week with question 60, even though there actually is a polemical edge there as well. We talked about. But it was kind of, hey, there's this passage in First Peter. What's going on here? By whom is this known? For known this mystery. But here, what we get is Maximus, sort of interestingly, he starts off explicitly summarizing what he will consider a wrong interpretation. And so I do want to kind of park there because there's going to be two things that jump out. They're going to structure the rest, I think, of his response. I should say this too. I rarely see anybody do a kind of in-depth. Like this is what I think I said it in the questions, like the notes and questions I sent you guys for the week. But this, along with a handful of other texts, is probably one of the most famous in Maximus's whole body of writings. And hopefully you can see why. I mean, it's an incredible text. I've had colleagues say this is their, if you have like a one go-to text in all of patristic literature to kind of see like a big picture kind of Christian view of creation and relation to, like, they would go here. Like, he's just flying everywhere. He's giving you the whole thing. But it's interesting because I just think it's the same kind of careful exegetical work that's usually done, say, with scripture or something in biblical scholarship, sometimes is lacking a little in texts like this that are so crucial. And so I want to try to attempt a little bit of that, give you like a clearer framework, I think, for what's going on. Otherwise, it sounds like he's just kind of, hey, here's another thing. Here's another point. It's just labyrinthine. It's so. Let's start from where he starts really quickly, and we're going to actually. What I want to do is extract a sort of framework, and I think it structures the rest of the text. The text itself from Gregory says it's a beautiful text on a sermon about love for the poor. I'll just read it briefly. What is this wisdom that concerns me? And what is this great mystery? Or is it God's will that we who are and this is the key phrase, a portion of God that has flowed down from above. We who are a portion of God, mira, portions of God that have flown down from above, have we not become exalted and lifted up on account of this dignity and so despise our Creator? So precisely because we're divine, it sort of, fueled our pride or something is what Gregory is sort of suggesting. Or is it not rather that in our struggle and battle with the body, we should always look to him so that this very weakness that has been yoked to us might be an education concerning our dignity? Okay, so a few just quick points on the actual text Maximus is going to address. First, you've got some notion of we are united and almost identical to God, right? We're a portion of God, number one. Number two, we've flowed down. There's a fall, you see. Number three, the fall is characterized by sin, a pride, a kind of we're proud of this dignity. And then number four, this struggle with the body, with the embodied existence that we currently know and experience, is somehow an education or training, presumably to what? To regaining what we lost in the fall, maybe? Those are just the bare elements of the text from Gregory. Now look at the story on Ambiguum 7.2. Look at the story or the interpretation that Maximus is going to do. It's going to be the so-called, in the literature, sort of the Origenist myth, the Origenist story. I am more than willing to talk about in the discussion after where I think this might come from, or who did or didn't have actually hold to it, whether or not Origen himself really did hold to it, and there's all kinds of fights and various interpretations of Origen himself and his legacy. So there's that question. But as Maximus knows it, as Maximus has heard it, he summarizes it here in one paragraph. This is that story he's going to say, and he's going to say, this story, people see that in Gregory's remarks, that he is supporting this kind of interpretation of the world. Which I just have to say, by the way, I mean, I still think it's odd that people think that Origenism or the Origenist tradition is somehow not pressing in the 6th and 7th century. I mean, here he is directly worried about, somebody's asking him to interpret this passage from Gregory because they know of other people that are using it to support this Origenist story. So I don't know where this idea came from that like the Origenist legacy was somehow petered out by then, by Maximus's lifetime. I don't really buy it. Here we go, though. Some people, regarding these words and expecting, as it seems, no reward for their labor undertaken in the search of the truth, have resorted to a rather facile interpretation, which in fact is largely derived from the doctrines of the Greeks. We might return to why he thinks that. According to this opinion, the opinion of these people, there once existed a unity of rational beings. That's a henad in the Greek. Logikon henada. Henad of rational beings, by virtue of which we were, and this is crucial, co-natural with God, right? Symphiis, co-natural, naturally together one with God. This is the sort of character of the Henad, in whom we had our remaining in our abode. All these are like technical key terms he's throwing out there. And it's going to sound like, what in the world? This is from left field, but it's going to open upon some really profound stuff. In addition to this, so note we've got an additional element. That's going to become important. In addition to this, they speak of a movement, that's a kinesis, that came about as a result of which the rational beings were variously dispersed, prompting God to look toward the creation of this corporeal world so that he could bind them in bodies as a punishment for their former sins. You can see where the Gregory's remarks, right? You can see the resonances that people might see between the story and his remarks, right? As a training in this body, right? This is what they think our teacher Gregory is alluding to in this passage, and they do not realize, however, that their theories are completely untenable and that their assumptions are all unsound, as a truthful examination will presently demonstrate. Okay, so he's going to undertake to refute this interpretation, right? That's the immediate occasion and goal of Ambiguum 7. But notice two elements of this story. And again, it can sound like this is sort of out of left field, like this is esoteric stuff. I don't know why. Why is he so concerned about this? Well, I think he's concerned about it because people usually do esotericism whenever they're actually hitting upon the deepest truths of things. Because it's hard to know how to characterize even the questions or the tensions at play there, let alone give some kind of resolution or answer. So I think it's a little bit, it's like a modern prejudice to sort of ignore that sort of thing, right? And be like, oh, well, that's just sort of this bizarre arcana, from wherever. It's like, well, sometimes it is. And often if it's flying, you're selling that stuff on the bookshelves of, I don't know, Barnes and Noble up front or something. And I like that place. So sure, maybe it is. But also sometimes these are symptoms of a deep wrestling with some fundamental stuff, perennial stuff that is not easily addressed. And I think Maximus sees in this story, regardless of where it came from or who held it, he sees that some of the deepest issues raised in Christian theology, and maybe broader than that, are at the forefront. So he thinks it's worth engaging at length. But the two elements that I want to highlight, that he is highlighting in this story, and therefore in this interpretation, are these. Because I think this structures the whole rest of the text. But these two are usually not teased out very carefully in the scholarship, in my opinion. First, the character of the Henad is, as I've already mentioned, co-natural. That is, it's immediate, it's inborn, there's no process. The union is a given. See what I'm saying? Unity. In fact, it's not even union, it's a unity. It's just a unity. It's a Henad that's there. It's a given. Okay, so that's one. So co-natural with God. That's one characteristic of this sort of union that he's gonna later call a windily spoken Henad, like sort of without substance, right? It's co-natural. But second, then, is this. It says, in addition, they speak of a movement that came about as a result of the movement away from the rational being's own sort of falling away. And then the consequent creation of the bodily world, this diverse, uneven, unequal, seemingly capricious, random, you're thrown into existence world, catches, according to this story, the falling souls from their primordial union with God, and is itself already an act, yes, of judgment, but also of providence. Providence understood as the return of everyone that's fallen to that original restored union or unity. So the two elements are that unity was co-natural with God and did not involve a process. Number two, that the only process is a result of straight up sin and fall. It's a failure. The sign of movement, or the movement itself, is already a sign of failure, right? So those are the two things Maximus is going to address. Most scholars of Maximus address the second one. They'll do the metaphysics of motion or something, and that is definitely there. And we're going to even look at one passage in particular about that. But they do so because what I want to suggest is because Maximus, he treats the two elements directly, but in reverse order of the way he presented them. So he presented the co-natural unity, then the movement away and process stuff, right? And what he's going to do is immediately after this turn to addressing the necessity of motion and the fact that if something's in motion, A, it's necessarily in motion by the fact it's created, but then B, it has not yet come to rest. Because the scholars like to say that's the kind of triad, the originist triad, that characterizes this story. Original stasis, rest, no process, just immediately given unity. Then a fall away, a kinesis, a motion away. And as a result, God reacts and he does genesis, creation of this world that you know. So there's an original co-natural unity, and there's a reactive genesis or creation to the fall of the members of that unity. Okay, Maximus immediately addresses the motion part, the fall, and he's going to say actually motion is good. He's going to give some reasons. We'll countenance here in a second. But I'm going to suggest that the logos logi doctrine, logoi logi, that is actually a direct response to that first element, that the character of the unity was co-natural. The whole, and that's something I had never really seen spelled out, that the logos, everyone agrees that the logi doctrine in Maximus is fundamental. It's sort of a superstructure of his thought. It shows up everywhere, right? But what they don't quite, and they even agree, it's sort of, there's something protological about it, right? I mean, these logi pre-exist in God, and sort of everything's made according to these principles, these logi, these words even. But what they don't quite see is that this, for Maximus, this is a direct, I don't know if it's replacement, a refinement, a development, a refutation / incorporation of the fundamental impulses of this originist story about the original primordial Hinad. He's replacing it with the logos logi doctrine in order to retain, I think, what he does think is actually right about it, but that's down the line. So sections 3 through 14 of Ambiguum 7 are a response to that second element, that motion is inherently bad, that we didn't need a process, right? I'm not going to go through all of them, but he gives something like, I think I've counted anywhere from 4 to 5 distinct, but maybe very tightly related arguments he gives against this idea. Some of them are immediately, I think, obvious, right? The first one he goes to in sections or paragraph 3 and 4 is that this would undermine hope. It's something that even Augustine countenances. I think it's in City of God. He also kind of does this move where he says, look, if there is such a thing as a primordial unity that we could fall away from, then what makes you think that we couldn't fall away from it again, even if we get back to it? So where is our hope of final restoration that's absolute and permanent, right? That we will forever enjoy bliss, eternal bliss and love and happiness. So that for Maximus, this story automatically undermines our eschatological hope, our hope in achieving, coming to an actual rest, in other words. But I think probably the more interesting arguments are this, what I sort of see as the second or third arguments. And it's about this notion that beauty itself must be what is alone sufficient to bring about the completion of the process, rather than depending on something like a contrast or an evil. This is going to create the tension with what our second text today. So let me look at then he says in paragraph 5. So this is Ambiguum 7:5. If on the other hand, that they say because of their experience of the contrary, that is, because you experience evil. By the way, I have to say, I think most people think of like evangelism and preaching the gospel in these terms. Most people today think you need something, for example, like an eternal conscious torment or hell as a good contrast to motivate people to actually care about maybe loving God or something. Right. And so Maximus is going to fundamentally reject the idea that God needs a contrast in order to achieve a result that he could not figure out how to achieve on his own. So here's what he says. If, on the other hand, they should say that because of their experience of the contrary, these rational beings were able but not willing then to abide in the beautiful, then the beautiful would of necessity be loved not for its own sake, but because of its opposite, as if it were not something naturally and properly desirable in and of itself. So the idea there, I think, is fairly clear. If you needed to kind of like hit rock bottom so that you can be like, oh, now I see that God is good. If you needed to kind of taste the dark side in order to get the sweetness of the light, then the light wasn't good enough. It was actually the contrast between light and darkness that was the better, the more useful, the more salutary, and more effective truth, right? That's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, I think. A lot of versions and theologies and even philosophies, broadly speaking, that God doesn't ultimately need a contrast. Even in Maximus's own thought, there's going to be a little tension there, as you might anticipate. So that's an argument he does. But then we finally get, I think, his big argument, this is the one that's drawn the most scholarly attention, is in 7.10, which is what basically you could call the metaphysics of motion. I'll just read a little bit of it, though I don't think we need to read too much to get the basic idea. 7.10, he says this. This is another argument for why it is that motion shouldn't be thought of as a result, as a sort of bad thing in itself, but it's actually the necessary condition for becoming good. If then rational creatures are created beings, then surely they're subject to motion, since they are moved from their natural beginning in being toward a voluntary end in well-being, for the end of the motion of things that are moved is to rest within eternal well-being itself, just as their beginning was being itself, which is God, who is the giver of being and the bestower of grace or the well-being, for he is the beginning and the end. And here's the key: for from God come both our general power of motion, he's our beginning, and the particular way that we move toward him. And this is a really famous passage because he's going to sort of bring all these prior arguments together in one snapshot of the ascent to God, the motion back to God, or just toward God. If an intellective being is moved intellectively, just as a side note, what kind of being you are, your essence, we talked about essence last week or so, what kind of being you are grants the qualities or the type or character of the motions or the activities that you do. So if you're a rock, your motion is pretty much, nil and totally governed by gravity in your relation as a rock, as a dense material to, right, the laws of gravity and so forth. But and that's actually true of your body, right? Your body is subject to all those laws. But what about other aspects of you, like your soul, your mind, the thoughts you have, right? All this stuff is a different sort of quality. So when Maximus says motion, of course, he's just thinking of all of that. The motion according to the kind of thing you are, how you move. Yes, you move bodily by locomotion, but you also move in your soul. You also move by your desire. You also move by your reflection, right? So forth. So he's going straight to intellective being, not because he doesn't think human beings have other sorts of motion, but because it's the most, for him, distinctive motion as compared to other kinds of things. All right, just a little note there. So if an intellective being like you is moved intelectively, that is, in a manner appropriate to itself, according to its own essence, then it will necessarily become a knowing intellect. The proper good motion of the mind is to know. The proper motion of the intellect is to apprehend and know and join in a kind of knowing motion with the intelligible things. But if it knows, and here we go, we're going to start steaming up here. This is the experiential sort of dynamism revving up in the ascent. If it knows, it surely loves that which it knows. And if it loves, it certainly suffers an ecstasy toward the toward it as an object of love. And if it suffers this ecstasy, it obviously urges itself onward. And if it urges itself onward, it surely intensifies and greatly accelerates its motion. All of this is gathering motion, gathering momentum, right? Toward the one sort of goal and end and rest and termination, peaceful termination of its motion. And if its motion is intensified in this way, it will not cease until it is wholly present in the whole beloved. This is, by the way, this is the logic of perichoresis, right? The whole in the whole, the complete whole, not obliterated in union with the whole, but also not somehow not in the whole in order to preserve its own identity as separate. Instead, it's the whole in the whole, wholly, completely. Okay, is wholly present in the whole beloved and wholly encompassed by it. That's the dual direction. Willingly receiving the whole saving circumscription by its own choice so that it might be wholly qualified. A lot of holes, right? Wholly qualified by the whole circumscriber, and being wholly circumscribed will no longer be able to wish to be known from its own qualities, but rather from those of the circumscriber, in the same way that air is thoroughly permeated by light, or iron in a forge is completely penetrated by fire, or anything else like this. So those are old tropes, classical traditional tropes to describe the sort of work of deification. The sword, which is iron and therefore has the qualities of metal or sharp metal, sharpness and all this, when it's placed in the fire, it takes on the very characteristics of fire, like heat. But Maximus's point, and this is such an interesting, subtle point that I don't always think is totally drawn out. It's just as true to say for him that the fire takes on the characteristics of the metal. It's not a one-way road, right? There is a fire that is now cutting because it's sort of a fire with the metal, and there's now a metal which is also now fiery. And in the synthesis of the two, this is the word we keep coming back to, the synthesis of these two seeming contraries, here I'm not sure they would be opposites, but they're contraries, are together in one. And so all of this is to say, Maximus's whole first argument against the second main element of this Origenist interpretation, not just of Gregory, but of the whole world, where they look at the world and say, look, we all begin seemingly at random points, and we're already sort of in motion. That must be a sign that we were primordially at rest. Otherwise, this is just kind of nonsense, this whole world. There's no intelligibility. There's no reason why you were born when you were born. And you are the way you are. You must have had a hand in that, because it'll be nonsense. It'll be sheer necessity. And it's already kind of a mar on your origin as a free spirit if you don't even have a hand in where you start. Maximus's argument against that is, well, no, actually the fact that you're created at all means you're not immediately identical, that is, without a process, identical to your own origin. But if you're not immediately identical to your own origin, then there's a sort of, as it were, space between you. And yet you do find your true beginning and end in that origin, in that cause, in God. And so there must be a process of returning or going towards it. And that process must culminate in exactly the way he just described, ultimately characterized by love, but by a satisfying desire, and ultimately and infinitely satisfying desire in the one that you love. And here's the key. If that's not true, then God is not actually who you love most fundamentally. And in that sense, he's not the creator of your own basic desires. You see what I'm saying? If he does not fulfill your desires and he needs some other helps, something external to God to kind of help you cling to God, then it's as if there is something in you that God cannot comprehend, does not relate to, and is not the author of, that he has to kind of coax over. And Maximus, on the one hand, setting up one side of the dilemma, right? On the one hand, Maximus wants to reject that and say we cannot ultimately say that God needed anything other than his own sheer beauty, his own sheer delightfulness and offer of satisfaction in himself, his very self, in order to sate your desire. Otherwise, your desire has its own origin somewhere else, not in God, so that it's not restful for your desire to find him desirable. because it needs something else got somewhere else. So it's a very, there's several arguments really there that are distinct when they're all related, but they're kind of, he's bringing them all together to make that kind of picture, that counterpoint. So not only is motion not a sign of a primordial fall, but it's good. It's necessary because you're created. You have to start somewhere. You have to have a beginning. And it's a necessarily oriented towards your true beginning and end. And that satisfaction, that completion of that motion must be a work of nothing but God himself, not something like the evil principle, which will sort of teach you how bad it is to not go towards the good principle, and together they make you finally rest, finally find your end. Okay, so that's all fine. That's sort of like my quick summary of the first 14 paragraphs. I don't know if it's quick, but it's for a summary of that, of this density of these texts. I think it's about as good as I can do. And that's stuff that's often discussed. It's been treated many times in different studies and stuff. But I do want to raise this question that I've already anticipated and alluded to at the end of that. Then is process in everything that it entails in real life, is all of that necessary in Maximus's view? He seems to be saying something like two different, not necessarily contradictory, but two not obviously coherent things. One is that we all have to undergo process. But then the second thing is that the completion of that process can't be done by anything other than God himself. It doesn't mean you don't have a hand in there, you don't cooperate in it. But when you're looking around the world, I mean, isn't the question really, given the devastation of the world, given the state of things, given the failure, the kind of fallenness of the world, isn't the question, so is this all necessary? Well, no, he just explicitly denied that, right? You can't say that God needs a contrary. But then do we not learn anything through the process and through our own failures? Do we not integrate any of these contrary experiences in order to actually achieve something that we might not have been able to on our otherwise? Okay, so you see how this is actually went from just refuting some kind of weird story about the like mythological origins of things to, okay, this is like fundamentally existential to where are you and what are you doing? Where are you headed and what's necessary to get there, right? Okay, so that's, I think, a little bit on his refutation or response to the idea that the true, like, creation is something God had to do and begin and put it as a response to our motion, which is itself evil because we're moving away from God, from our primordial unity. Then we turn in around, say, 7:15, and I want to turn to that now, 7.15, to his response to that first element. It's coming second, right, in his order of presentation, but it's that first one in the story. It's this identity on the level of nature, connatural unity of this primordial, right, perfect paradise almost. Look what he says in 7:15, because here he's going to offer his own kind of identity. It's just not on the level of nature. Who, knowing that it was with reason and wisdom that God brought beings into existence out of nothing. So that's kind of crucial, guys. Even there, I know I always stop and interrupt this, but he just argued that creation ex nihilo entails motion, because it means you have your beginning exterior to you, as it were. But you need to move towards that beginning, and that is your end. And so it seems like, and here I think a lot of people would simply rest content with a picture of the world that, well, okay, so it's really simple, guys. God just speaks you into existence. It's kind of what it sounds like in the beginning of the Bible. And that's just by his will. And if you ask why or how that happens, you're just sort of prying into divine things. We're getting too deep, too high, too lofty for you, right? Just accept that he just sort of put you there, like formed you out of the clay, like a Play-Doh sort of figure, and breathed life into you so that and that's a cool miracle. And now you're just on your way and you're moving and reacting, and hopefully you reach your end. But Maximus is going to also notice something that later thinkers like Eriugena notice. The same doctrine, creation from nothing, simultaneously entails that nothing that you have can be anything other than God, right? Even if it's by God's will, if God's will is somehow part of his being or even identical to his essence, according to some, then it must be that anything created by his will is also means that nothing it is not God, at least potentially. So who, knowing that it was with, so, but that, by the way, the point would be that would seem to almost start to go back towards the origin of story, right? The primordial unity that's fundamentally linked to God, like as a divine link without process. It's just naturally there. But here's going to be his response, I think. The whole logi doctrine. Who, knowing that it was with reason and wisdom that God brought beings into existence out of nothing, if he were carefully to direct the contemplative power of his soul to their infinite natural differences in variety, I don't know how often you do that every day, but apparently you should. And with the analytical power of reason, were, together with these, to distinguish in his mind the logos according to which they were created, would not. I mean, this translation you might think is super complicated. It's pretty faithful to the Greek. Maximus is a complicated writer. So who, having sort of surveyed all this stuff and noticed that there's such great wide diversity, and yet there's a fixity in the very flux of the diversity, see, the philosophers can contemplate the already seeming sort of peaceful harmony or potential coincidence of unity and diversity, of change and sameness, right? And there's a whole tradition behind that in Plato, for example. Who hasn't just figured this out by looking around? Who would not, I ask, fail to know that the one logos as the many logi, indivisibly distinguished amid the differences of created things, owing to their specific individuality, which remains unconfused, that's a word from Chalcedon, both in themselves and in respect to one another. Moreover, would he not also know that the many logi are the one logos, seeing that all things are related to him without being confused with him, who is the essential personally distinct logos of God the Father, the origin and cause of all things? And look at this, we've seen this before, in whom all things were created, in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, right? Stuff from Colossians 1. So notice what basically he just did there. The perennial and classic problem of the one and the many. How is it that the many come forth from the one? If they come forth from the one, are they therefore not distinct from the one? Because the one, after all, is one, and they are many. But if they are distinct from the one, then in what meaningful sense can we say that they came forth from the one as if they were a part of the one? The one has no parts. Right? But then that's one way to approach it. That would be like Parmenides' way or something, right? You start with the oneness of all things and you try to work from the one towards the many, and how do you connect those two? Or you could start more like an Aristotelian, sort of on the ground sort of way. Let's look around at the diversity and start there and work our way back towards the one, the unity. Same problem in just other direction. No matter how unified you can think of things, well, like, let's see. Everything has something called being. So everything is a being. Everything exists. Then there are other sorts of categories of beings like inanimate or animate. Okay, so there's a unity on that level, that sort of categorical or taxonomical level. Okay, but then even within animate things, there are some things that seem to have rationality. You see, this old classical classification, right? Which is an act of unifying diverse beings in one direction or diversifying general concepts in the other direction. Maximus's point would be, you can do that all day long, whichever direction you want to go, wherever you want to start from, the many or towards the one, or from the one towards the many. And the question still remains, yes, you have a sense that both are there and both are somehow related, but who does the relating? Where are they truly one, even as they are truly distinct and individual? And his claim right up front here, shouldn't surprise us, right, is that relation, that very act of synthesis, which seems to defy logic or possibility, is exactly who the Logos of the Father is. It is Christ, Colossians 1:16, in whom all things were created. Christ himself is the unity of the one and the many. In other words, Christ himself is the true primordial relation between the hynad and the one, which the Origenist myth tried to call co-natural and just said, well, sort of like a natural unity. It's on the level of nature that they're one. What he's saying, look, he says it's the essential and personally distinct Logos of God. It's in the person of the Word of God that they are one, and in paradoxically, truly many. So it's this moving from the purely logical register to the Logos himself. And that's the dynamism. That's where the true synthesis is going to. That's where the recapitulation of what he quotes, right, Ephesians in this in Big Yom 7. He goes on at one point. He lists all these texts from the New Testament. And what are they all? They're all texts about the body of Christ. You know, the members of the body are many, but it's one body. That's just the one many problem run through Christology, through the New Testament, right? So his response, is my point, is his response to the co-natural hinad that the Origenists were rightly sensing that there has to be some link between God and, you know, the one and the many, God and all of creation. But they were wrong to characterize it as simply co-natural. Instead, it's one person, one personal, the person of Christ. And the event, as we saw last week, of the incarnation is the beginning and the end of all ages and all the creatures within those ages, right? They've received their beginning for this reason alone. So that's how his refutation of the the Origenist myth sort of opens on a whole nother vision. He doesn't relinquish that there is such an identity between God and the world, but he doesn't characterize it as natural purely. He characterizes it as personal in the Logos. And then that opens up to the body logic. I have to this is the last little text I'll read from this really dense text that we could go a million ways for, but I have to read this. It's almost like I'm under contract to do so. And it's 7:21, and we'll do a part of 22. And I'm not even going to read all of it, but I want to jump through it. Well, let's do it this way. There's another way to apprehend this principle. This is 21, which will be familiar to those who have been taught to approach the Logia in accord with right faith and practice. So he's done this high-flying stuff that I just tried to articulate. He's trying another approach to the same exact point. Here this is his version of starting from the many. He's starting from the practice of spiritual life and prayer and asceticism. He's a monk after all, right? And he's about to start there. He says, you can think of it this way. The essence in every virtue, that's what we're striving for, goodness, justice, the fruit of the Spirit, right? All that stuff. The essence of every virtue is our Lord Jesus Christ. As it's written, God made him our wisdom, our righteousness, our holiness, our redemption, 1 Corinthians 1. These things are, of course, said about him in an absolute sense, for he is wisdom. He is righteousness and sanctification itself, not in some limited sense. Skip down, which is to say that anyone who through fixed habit participates in the virtue unquestionably participates in God, who is the substance of virtue. For such a person freely and unfeignedly chooses to cultivate the natural seed of the good. So there is a natural link, but the natural seed of the good in you is Christ in you. Colossians 1:27. This is the mystery of Christ in you. But Christ is person. So there's other dimensions, not just like a natural power you have. Christ is in you already as the foundation of all your natural powers. That's why the Logos is the Logi. Okay, the principles. He deigns to make himself the principle, the beginning, the very continuum of your whole motion, which you will live, called your life. And he has shown that the end to be the same as the beginning. And actually the word is the same. It's identical to the beginning. And the beginning is the identical or the same as the end. Or rather, the beginning and end are one and the same. So you see how he's emphasizing the identity. This is interesting because I think, as I mentioned before, Origen and his work on first principles constantly will have that refrain: the beginning is like the end. The end is like the beginning. Maximus is upping the ante here, saying they're the very same thing. We could have just gone to the Apocalypse, right, where Jesus says, I'm the Alpha and the Omega. And it's he who is saying both. He is both of those, and he is the same. Right, so he says that in this he is a genuine advocate of God, since the goal of each thing is believed to be its beginning and end, for it's from the beginning that he received being and even participation in what is naturally good. So Christ makes us able to participate in the divine life. Having completed this course, so this is the end of this motion he's been defending. Having completed this course, such a person becomes God. Receiving from God to be God. I love that phrase. We so often think of God as like what it means to be God means to be above. What it means to be God means to be dominant, to be powerful, to be the monarch, to be the maybe not the tyrant, but maybe the gentle monarch, still nevertheless is always superior. And what Maximus is saying, this is an old, I think it's inherent just in the gospel. Whenever Christ, immediately when he says, I call you friends in John, I think it's already, we're on the way, right? And it's this. Actually, he shows his superiority precisely by making his inferiors equal. It's utterly paradoxical. It's kenotic. It's cruciform, whatever you want to call it. It's a total inversion of your expectation. You would think that God to be God would mean he perpetually has creatures, however glorified, and that the creatures, because they are by nature created, must be by nature subordinate. And if they're by nature subordinate, they're perpetually subordinate. They never cease to be creatures, even if they get eternal life. What Maximus is saying is actually the greatest act of God, which is nothing less than the fulfillment and end of his own incarnation as human, when he became a creature, so that creatures might become what? Creator? God? That is when he's most God. That is when he's most manifest as God. Because we receive from God to be God. So yes, it's God's initiative, but look at the paradox of the result. And this is where we're starting to break some ground, because even though he's saying that process is natural and necessary just by the fact that you're created by nature, I am going to suggest to you that he does not think process is absolute. That, to put it even still differently, the result of the process is exactly to accomplish something that you don't think is possible through anything that has to go through processes, namely to become the one who began the process. How do you receive from God? That sounds like a process. I can get that, right? In prayer, I'm becoming more like God. I imitate Christ. I become more like God. I'm getting closer to God. There's an ascent, all that stuff, right? All the traditional language. Glorified, sanctified, whatever you want to say, right? But the result is that you become identical with the beginning of the process, which is something that seems by its inherent logic to be impossible. How could I ever arrive at the beginning of the process if I have to undergo the process, right? How could you ever supersede the process itself through what does it mean to say there's a process that supersedes the process? See where I'm getting at? This is utterly paradoxical. I receive from God, so received from God to be God, for to the beautiful nature inherent in the fact that he is God's image, he freely chooses, that's a process again, freely chooses to add the likeness to God by means of the virtue in a natural movement of ascent through which he grows in conformity to his own beginning. So what Maximus is saying is, you who don't want to maybe think about this this high-flying logos, logi, one many, metaphysical stuff, just think about this. What are you doing whenever you're trying to do the spiritual practices? What's your goal in all this? Where are you headed, And for Maximus, where you're headed is exactly what was disclosed last week in the Incarnation. You're headed to achieve in you the very thing Christ achieved in history in the Incarnation. Perfect, remember last week's text? Perfect identity brings humanity into perfect identity with divinity in every way. Not by essence, but that's fine because nobody's just an essence. There's something higher. There's an ecstatic other dimension to being, to life itself, which is access through love, right? Through the interpersonal. Because, of course, the resolution of the one many is a person. So it couldn't be got at in any other way. And just to make sure you don't think I'm simply making this up completely and shooting from my hip, let's just jump to the end of 22, because he basically just says it explicitly. So at the bottom of 105, it says, in honoring these logi principles, which, by the way, are the logos. He's already said that, right? They are him. They're him in the mode of condescension to bring you into being and to propel your process. In honoring these logi and acting in accordance with them, he, that is the person on the way to God, He places himself wholly in God alone, forming and configuring. Another way to put that would be typifying, like stamping. Typifying God alone throughout his entire being, so that he himself by grace is and is called God. Just as God, here's the key. How is that possible that you can receive God from God to be God? How can you be and be called God? Well, this is his answer. Just as God by his condescension is and is called man or human for the sake of man, and also so that the power of his reciprocal disposition might be shown forth herein, a power that deifies man through his love for God and humanizes God through his love for man. And by this beautiful exchange, it renders God man by reason of the divinization of man, and man God by reason of the incarnation of God. And here we go, my fave. For the Logos of God, who is God, wills always and in all things to actualize or accomplish the mystery of his embodiment. The very thing Christ accomplished in his historical life, which to us looks like an event among other events, cordoned off by the normal finite determinations of space-time, something that occurred in the middle of all this, that very achievement is nothing less than the goal of God, the Word of God, who is God, that he's trying to achieve in everyone, including you. In fact, you don't exist at all except for this to be achieved through you and in you and as you. So when you are ascending to God in spiritual life and spiritual practices, simultaneously through that process, God is descending into you. And in a sense, he's always already been there, waiting to be, right? It's paradigm, waiting to be actualized. But the thing is that the more you take on the qualities of God, the more then that what seemed to be necessary initially, the process, you will supersede it. And another text says you'll vault beyond all intervals of time and space, as Melchizedek did, because he was, as it says, without generation, which is amazing. You will become without generation. So the end of the process is to supersede the logic of the process, and yet you have to undergo the process to get there. So it turns out this whole creation thing is far more complicated than it sounded when I first read Genesis 1. God said, let there be light, and there was light. Oh, okay, I get that. That's a nice picture. I can see that. I understand that.
Forging Plowshares is a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom by providing in-depth, transformative biblical and theological education and discipleship. If you have found this podcast valuable, please remember to share on social media. If you have questions about what you've heard, or if you'd like to learn more about how you can get involved with Forging Plowshares or even support this ministry financially, please visit our website, forgingplowshares.org.